Welcome, Sara Kinsey. Nice to have you here. Sara is the head of digital marketing, demand generation, and events at GEM. She's been there for over 2 years, and prior to GEM, Sara was at Unifi Software, which got acquired, and also at Alteryx, which IPO'd. So truly, Sara, you're a B2B SaaS leader. About GEM, it was founded in 2017, has about 110 people, and is based out of San Francisco, California. And on the funding side, it is a Series B startup. So they've raised $48 million total. So thank you for being here, Sara.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Wonderful. Let me give a little bit of a background on GEM in case there are folks that have not heard of it. It is the platform for modern recruiting. And my ears always perk up when I hear modern because it's the Modern Startup Marketing Podcast, right? So,
right.
So clearly, I was interested, I was curious, and I wanted to bring you on here. It is essentially for recruiters and hiring teams to find, engage, and nurture top talent. So the story behind how the co-founders got together, Steve and Nick, they were working together as engineering managers, not together. They were working separately. One was at Dropbox, one was at Facebook, and they were using spreadsheets, right, to track the best talent, which they called gems. And they knew that they needed to build something better than that, which makes a lot of sense. So yeah, did I cover that? Anything else you want to add around?
No, you did. You did a fantastic job, better than most in understanding what GEM is and how it fits in. And when I was thinking yesterday about how to explain what GEM does and who it's for, which you've now done a great job, so I don't need to. But when I was thinking about what the right way to explain it to your audience would be, I thought, this will be easy because really it's super easy to explain to marketers. Because what GEM is doing is what marketing automation and CRM created for marketers 10 to 12 years ago. And just as today, I cannot imagine doing my job without marketing automation and a CRM. Like, I would be crippled. I wouldn't know what to do. And that is exactly what GEM is creating for talent acquisition teams. Before products like GEM, and GEM is one of the first ones doing exactly what we're doing. And before GEM, recruiters and sourcers really were tracking their list of gems in spreadsheets and keeping track of when do they need to follow up next. And it doesn't matter how detailed you are, things fall through the cracks, and you can't track and measure and A/B test and report out. And there's so many analytics that you don't have unless you have a piece of software like this, as marketers very well know. And to be honest, that was one huge reason why I was so attracted to GEM when I started talking to them for the first time 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I also thought of that when I said engage, find, engage, and nurture. And then also early stage startups for their sales data, a lot of them start with spreadsheets before they bring on a CRM. So you made a really good point there. So question for you, let's just dive right in. With GEM, since you've been there for over 2 years, what did you focus on early stage when you joined and you had limited resources? What did you focus on for your marketing efforts?
Well, I was the first marketer to join GEM. So when I joined, there was no marketing yet. There was a website, which was nice that there was, a little bit of content, a place for people to land if they were trying to learn about GEM. But there was no content. There was no marketing automation. The sales team did have a CRM. That we had Salesforce, which was great. So when I first joined, I knew coming in that my goals were all around demand generation and creating leads to feed our baby sales team. And when I say baby, I don't mean inexperienced. I just mean small. We had some really great salespeople on the team then. We were very lucky in that we had some early traction and we were able to prove out early product market fit. And so by the time I joined, even though it was just at Series A, we were ready to drive leads. And so what that meant was the first thing that I did was hire a content strategist and a writer. She went to work doing all the research and writing to create our first significant asset that, of course, then as a demand gen marketer, I could piece up and use in all of the channels that you would expect a marketer doing B2B SaaS marketing would use. And that won't surprise any demand gen marketers when I say that it was a definitive guide to something, because every marketing team needs one of those, right? So
I was going to ask you, what was this asset? It sounds like it was a guide. Was it an ebook?
You know, ebook, white paper, visual white paper. It was a big, beefy piece of content, a lot of pages, really good content, data, research was put into it. A lot of our own proprietary data that we could uniquely have and see, but also she did a bunch of research and was able to quote and cite some other leaders in the industry too. So she created that. Within the first 3 months, we had that first piece ready to go. We used a freelance graphic designer to make sure it looked great. And then I got to work promoting it. And I promoted it with, we had a very small database of, I don't know, 5,000, maybe 10,000 leads in our database. I started promoting it there. We figured out we probably need a blog. Let's figure out how to start doing blog writing. And we did a little bit of content syndication with that asset. We made a webinar out of it. At the same time, we were attending some events in our space, like trade show conferences back when we could actually go in person. And this asset was, an offering at the booth. We created, our CEO did a session based on the content of the white paper or the ebook, whatever you want to call it, which was very well attended. And that was our first hint that we were onto something when it came to marketing to our audience with really great thought leadership content that was deep and meaningful, and that events were key for us, which I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but just a sneak peek, we have not found that events went by the wayside for us during this last year.
Well, I'll definitely want to talk to you about that. So with events being key, do you mean now turned virtual? So
Yeah.
were you were doing trade shows? What kind of events were you doing prior to COVID?
We were experimenting with all the different kinds of events we could, because our audience is talent acquisition teams at all levels, right? The recruiters and the sourcers through chief people officers. We were trying to find events and venues and content that would attract all these different levels at all different segments of organization sizes. And we just kept seeing that all of them were being successful for us. Everything from trade shows with booths to happy hours in our offices where we would invite everybody in San Francisco in talent acquisition who we knew to stop by and learn a little bit and drink and eat some. They were showing up to that in far larger numbers than I had ever experienced before, even when we had it at really cool venues. Like this was our little startup office, which, okay, it was cool, but it was, a Series A startup office. They would show up to that. Webinars were working for us. Let's see, what else were we doing? I think that maybe that was what we were doing at the beginning before the pandemic. And they were all working. We thought, wow, like this is surprising how well it's working. It must be because this is our audience is a very people-driven audience, right? Recruiters and sourcers spend their days talking to people. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't like it. And so that was the first thing, is we realized, okay, they like interacting, they like networking. And then the other thing that occurred to us that we have since, I think, proven out is, just like what we said at the beginning of our conversation, where GEM is doing for the talent acquisition industry what marketing automation and CRM gave to marketers 10 to 12 years ago. Marketers craved that. It was a tough transition because you went from being able to talk about what your gut was telling you to do to having to show data to prove what you were doing. But we all loved it, I think. Like all the marketers that I talk to are so happy to have data, to show what works, to test what works, and to prove and show our value. And I think that happens with sourcers and recruiters in the talent acquisition industry as well. And so I think what we were seeing at events is we had a group of people who wanted to be there. They wanted to network. They wanted to learn, and they want to have this thought leadership, and they want this new modernization of their department and their industry to happen. But because it is so new, they also crave this learning and this thought leadership. And I think Jem just got it exactly right with timing, and our content writer is so good that what she puts together is really valuable. It's not a bait and switch at all. It's truly deep, wonderful content that we then use in all of our messaging and conversations that we have with the people we invite to our events. I guess that was a really long way to explain that. So sorry if it was kind of all over the place, but it's our content together.
Yeah, it's great. You talked about first, right, that you put together a really significant asset, right, the actual content, and then you promoted it across different channels. And what you ended up finding was the channels that worked the best for you is like based on what your audience wants from you. Like they're a people-driven audience, so you need to think about them, do stuff for them, and organize your activities in marketing around them, what they're looking for. I'm curious, when you say all this stuff like really worked well, it was working for us, what does that mean working? Because we're talking about top of the funnel right now. And I'm curious, what did you end up learning about? Well, we did like the booths at the trade show versus we did those happy hours. People came and they had some snacks versus we did the webinars. Like, what was the difference in the working of this stuff to get the leads, but then also move them down the funnel?
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I love this question. Yay. Okay, here we go. So yes, you're right. It started out with just top of funnel. Is this working? Just, are people showing up? Like that was the first thing, which doesn't actually mean it's working, right? For sure. It doesn't mean that it's working. But early on, like that is the first signal, the very, very top of the funnel. Will people show up to this event? Will they talk to you, or are they only showing up because of the swag that you're giving out? Like what's the reason that they're showing up? Are the conversations actually about your product, and are you making those connections versus handing out pens and water bottles or whatever it is you have? So that was our first indication that it was working. To jump to the very end, and then I'll give more details in the middle, the real reason why we know it's working is because we went from 20 customers to 50 customers to 100 customers to 250 customers, and now we have over 500 customers. So we know that marketing is contributing in marketing sourced leads that become opportunities that become closed won in a big way, but we also know that the influenced piece is really key. So that's why we know it was working. But then to go into a bit more detail of what we actually tracked and measured for these different events, that might be kind of fun to talk about. For events, like the events that are the trade shows or the happy hours, things like that, those are hard for sure, because those are a mix of general awareness, very influential, versus tracking the lead all the way through to the end of the funnel. But what we did do is set up really careful and rigorous tracking and tagging of leads so that we would know which leads came from this event that were net new to our database, so that we knew we were building our database. Which leads had we interacted with before, and this was a touch point along their journey with us. Which leads were we having conversations with that made sense for us to mark them as marketing qualified leads and send them to our SDR team to hopefully then get a demo and begin that sales conversation. And then along the way, if they were net new to our database, or if the activity, the interaction with them at these events flipped them over to that marketing qualified lead that began the conversation with the sales team, we can go back and see, was this event key in that process and that cycle? And then we also have tracking set up so that we can see, as they become opportunities and as they become closed won or closed lost, we can easily go back and see how did these events impact them along the way. For the events that are the trade shows or the happy hours, those are a little bit harder sometimes for me to know what is their true value when I take how much did they cost versus what did we actually get. And I'll talk about that in a second. I will just like maybe leave it on the shelf by saying it is harder there sometimes to know how do you really know when it works. So let me move over to webinars for a minute, because I think those are a bit easier. Webinars for us are so easily trackable because really it is just you can track it the exact same way as you track a white paper asset. It's just that it is a recording, right? And so we can track who registers for the event, who actually shows up for the event, how much of the event do they watch. I've got our tracking set up in our system so that if they show up as an attendee, but they only stay for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, they do not count as a marketing qualified lead. They have to stay for long enough for us to see that they were actually interested in the content, for us to then nurture them and then follow up with our sales team and move them forward. So those events are far easier, I think, for us to be able to see, are they working in terms of which content is producing those MQLs and those opportunities down the line.
Beautiful. Thank you for answering that. I know that can be, that's like the question, right? That people want to know. Well, you're doing all this top of funnel stuff. And you mentioned 2 key things. You mentioned, as you saw your customers grow exponentially, right? Yeah. You realize that a lot of those are marketing sourced. Marketing sourced is very powerful. It means that you can get more budget to keep doing more good stuff with your marketing. Marketing sourced versus marketing influenced. How do you think about that within the company? Like, do you focus more on sourced versus influenced? If it's influenced, like, how do you actually make the case for that? Because I think sometimes it's a little harder to say, well, marketing had influenced this customer close.
Yeah, it is never easy for any marketer or any organization to have the answer on that, right? It's just not possible. Just as you said, it's hard always. I think for GEM, we're very fortunate in that marketing and sales truly are one team. We report into the same leader. The VP of marketing and myself are good friends at this point. We've worked together for over 2 years, and we have developed a relationship which is both professional and personally good, which helps a lot. And what that means is with the 2 of us reporting into the same leader, and with the 2 of us having that good relationship between the 2 of us, there is no finger pointing or I want credit. No, I want credit. That just doesn't happen at GEM, which I'm so grateful for. I know it will at some point. It always does. I also think it's healthy at some point when there is that pull and push and give and take. But I'm grateful that at this stage, that isn't something that happens for us. And so what that means is that we can have real conversations about what is best for the business rather than, well, what's best for the marketing team and what is best for the sales team, or we can really talk about what's best for GEM, what's going to give us the data that's going to help us make the right decisions to fund our marketing programs, to hire the right salespeople at the right time, to make sure that we grow quickly and scale well. So a lot of the conversations that I will have with anybody on the sales team, whether it's the SDR who's making the phone calls and doing the follow-ups, or Joe, our VP of sales, a lot of these conversations might be, now hang on, like, I think this was a marketing source lead, but you just marked it as outbound. Why? And we can have that conversation in a way that is not finger pointing at all. And I can say, look, I don't really care which one it is, but you got to understand that if we don't get our tracking programmatically correct, if marketing doesn't get the, in quotes, credit for this that it should, marketing won't get the resources that we need in the future to continue having these leads coming to you at this volume with this kind of quality. So that's the reason why I care about this, how we're tracking this lead to this detail. And that understands, with no malice towards anybody.
That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like you have a lot of cohesion. And when you say, like, you and VP of marketing, you report to who? Is it the CEO?
No, we now have, last November, we hired a COO, and we both reported to him now.
Okay, perfect. And then the VP of sales also reports into the COO, or how does that?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. So you're all kind of like flat there. That's really cool.
So the go-to-market team of marketing, sales enablement, and customer success, we all report into the same leader, and it's wonderful. It's a really good org structure.
That's awesome. Okay. And since we're talking about team structure and you're growing fairly quickly, I'm curious, what does the marketing, like the larger marketing team now look like? You talked about some of the leadership there, but who else is on there?
On the marketing team, you said specifically?
Yes.
So you are right that our team is always growing. So what I'll talk about is what we are today, and then maybe some open headcount that we have today. And like you said, it's growing and changing as we grow and change. Today, the team has, I believe, 8 people on it. I have 2 event marketers, 2 integrated campaign marketers, 2 web inbound marketers, then some supporting cast of graphic design, writer, marketing ops. We are experimenting with ABM now. We don't have a team or a department. ABM is being experimented out of the web and inbound marketing group. And we currently have open headcount to build out our product marketing team. We haven't had a person who has owned product marketing. It has been a function that has been shared between marketing and product and sales, and we're bringing that on now, and we're really excited for it.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for sharing all of that with me. Okay, so we talked about early stage, what you focused on, where you were getting some traction, what your learnings were there, and kind of how you think about marketing sourced versus influenced, and like working cohesively with the sales team to make sure that it's not just top of the funnel, but you're also moving the leads down to closed one. What has been working really well for you as of late? Like, what channels are they? I think what you're going to say is some of the stuff that was working, like the events you're continuing to do just digitally. Yeah. But I'd love to hear more on like what's working really well, and also maybe like why do you think that is?
Yeah, so I am going to talk about events a little bit more. You know, it's a bit strange because I would not have considered myself an event marketer in the past. It has not been an area that I loved or personally gravitated for or towards. In fact, I remember in interviews in the past when I might get the question around, you know, what's the one thing that you don't love, but you can do, but it's kind of a grind for you? Events might have been my answer. And I've kind of changed on that now because of the success that we've seen with them. So yes, events have continued to be great for us, but what we have seen is that it's not the style of event, and the targeting of event has become far more important to us this year. And that's why, you know, I mentioned we have a team of 2. One event person we hired just 3 weeks ago, because we just need more bandwidth and more power there. So we continue to do webinars, but we are thinking about webinars now as far as top of funnel and middle of funnel webinars. We've started to see that we really do need that journey of content, not just with written content and reports and messaging on our website, but with our webinars as well. And so we've seen that some of these bottom of funnel, middle of funnel webinars are being successful for us as well, like a demo days webinar. We just experimented with that a week or 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was shocked at how well that worked. I didn't think that people would want to show up for a demo webinar, but they do, and they asked great questions and really engaged with it. But only, I think, because we had nurtured these leads and we were very targeted with who we invited and what we were sharing on the demo webinar.
What did you focus on for like who you brought into that or who you invited to that webinar?
So we have integration partners with different ATSs, different applicant tracking systems, you know, Smart Recruiters, Lever, Greenhouse, Workday, for instance. And this one was specifically for people in our database who had engaged with us around content related to Greenhouse. So they knew that we knew that they had Greenhouse installed. We know how we integrate really well with Greenhouse and which areas Greenhouse users might have pain points that Gem can help solve. And so then the demo that we shared with them was specific to those pain points and how Gem with Greenhouse can be a really strong recruiting tech stack for them.
That makes sense. Super relevant, right, for that target audience. So wonderful. Okay, so events seems to, and the webinar, like this is an example that you gave, seems to be great for you, and you're continuing to focus on events, bringing people together. Any other events that you can think of that have worked really well probably not like inviting people to the office for a happy hour, but
No,
these are right. But these are people that still really value being together, talking, learning, with other like-minded folks. So anything else that you've created for them?
Yes. So we took the happy hour that we were doing in our office, and we were getting anywhere from maybe 20 to 40 people showing up to those in-office happy hours. And we, at the beginning of the pandemic, we said, let's just try making it virtual. Probably nobody's going to want to show up, but let's give it a try. And we had over 100 people show up to those. And we've done those every couple months since then. And what's different about that, I do want to talk about the difference between what we do there versus what we do in a webinar, because it confuses even our team, our sales team on wait, what's the difference between a talent talk event and a webinar? What we're doing that's different is subtle, but I think significant. One, with a webinar, it's on a webinar platform, it's recorded with the speaker who's doing some kind of a presentation with a PowerPoint. There's probably polls, typed in Q&A, things like that. These talent talk events, these are over the lunch hour. We use Zoom, and we don't use the Zoom webinar. We use actual Zoom where people can mute and unmute themselves, and video on, video off. We encourage people to have video on. We encourage them to also have mute on, but then as they want to, come on and off mute to ask questions and engage. And usually what we do for these talent talk events is we do pick a theme. We get a speaker, an outside of GEM speaker, to talk about what is working for them. Sometimes it'll be a fireside chat kind of conversation with one of us from GEM moderating and trying to help, very much like you're doing, I think, with this podcast, actually, trying to help draw out what are the interesting, pertinent things. And then we do that for maybe half an hour. There's not screen share. It's just video talking, people talking for maybe 20 or 30 minutes. And then we either will open it up to questions of people, coming off mute and asking the questions, or typing it in the chat if they're more comfortable with that. And we will ask the audience, so what do you want to do now? Do you want to keep having Q&A? It seems like there's a lot of great questions here. Or would you like to break out into breakout sessions and talk about what you've just learned here, what you've just heard, with a smaller group of 3 or 4 or 5 people? And Zoom has this great feature where you can do that. You can say, click a button that says, break groups out into groups of 5. So if you have 50 or 100 people, you can very quickly get everybody, without them leaving or clicking elsewhere, into a smaller group setting, set the timer to bring them back in 10 minutes, and then you could send them out again with another talking point. This has been really popular. Again, we were surprised. We were surprised that people showed up, but it was a very, even though it replaced in our minds what was our happy hours in our offices, it was totally different than what actually occurred in our offices. So it's definitely a new style event that I believe we will continue. And the good news is you don't have to be in San Francisco, which is why I think these virtual events will continue even after we get back to being able to do in person as well.
This is such a great focus in this episode, this events piece. I think that you've nailed it, and I think that companies need to figure out how to do this and how to do this well, because it's already happening, and I think more so with communities of people that are just trying to learn from other experts or get with like-minded. Like, it's already happening. There are people that are in these groups, hanging out with each other virtually for like an hour, maybe like an hour and a half. And I know I've been involved in these sessions, and I know that it's so valuable. And I think that it's just like a very, if a startup is not doing this, it's one of those like low-hanging fruits, I think, right? Of course you want to meet regularly.
I think it is, sorry to interrupt you there. I think it's easy to say it's a low-hanging fruit, because you're right. It's kind of an obvious way to deliver value. And if you're delivering value, then you're going to be recognized. You're going to reap the benefits of that. But I think that one thing that I want to caution myself and anybody who might be listening is thinking that low-hanging fruit doesn't really mean easy, though. It's hard, because scheduling the event and getting people to show up, that part's actually not too difficult if your audience is like ours, who crave that kind of interaction. I've also done marketing to data analysts before. I don't think this would work for them. Like, it just wouldn't. So it does depend on your audience. But it is hard. We put so much work. Like our events team are learning how to be content creators as well. Everybody on the team is practicing that skill in a way that I don't think they expected to in the jobs that they're in. And so, sometimes we do script things out in a very detailed fashion, but we think about, how do we script this out in such a way so that it can feel natural? How do we script this out so that we can also be responsive to what the audience says or does, or sometimes doesn't do? And so like it is low-hanging fruit, but it's very hard, and it takes an enormous amount of time, and it can be hard to make sure that you're spending the right time on something like a small event. So actually, let me add one other kind of event that we do. We've also started doing a small roundtable VIP type of happy hour events with senior leaders, often from enterprise companies. And we cap these at very small numbers. We try not to do more than maybe 9 people per event, and that includes our own GEM people at this event. These are expensive to do from a timing perspective and bandwidth of the team, but they are valuable, very valuable. But we spend a lot of time scripting out, how are we going to make sure that the conversation in Zoom isn't exhausting for the attendees? Who's going to take the ownership of driving the conversation if it peters out? What if we don't have a bunch of extroverts? What are we going to do then? How do we keep the conversation going so that none of our guests feel the onus of participating? Like, how do we make it really easy for them? And that kind of work, whether it's in the really small events or in the bigger events like the talent talks that have 100 people, or even we did our first our own conference last year, and we had tracks of speakers, and we had over 1,500 attendees. It was so exciting for us. But the amount of work that goes into making sure that the content and what we're delivering is comfortable in a virtual setting is a huge amount of work, and not low-hanging fruit, yes, because you should do it, but not easy.
Oh, I love that you mentioned that. You're absolutely right. Maybe that answers the question of why aren't more companies doing this? Because I've had a lot of folks on the show, and we haven't really dug into events. In fact, a lot of people are like struggling to figure out, like, what do webinars look like going into the future, as people are kind of getting tired of it? What does events look like going into the future? Like, I think a lot of folks are really trying to figure that stuff out, and it's going to be different depending on your target audience, and the stuff you're working on is not easy. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I was going to ask you have had these events, and some of them are recorded, right? So what do you do with the recorded sessions? Do you record those talent talk events? Like, what's the next step? Okay, you did that event, then what happens?
Yeah, we do record them most of the time. Sometimes we will get a speaker who says, yeah, I'm happy to speak, but I don't know about being recorded. I don't know if my comms team will, like, I feel okay about speaking, but not recorded, because then I'd have to ask my comms team. Or maybe they just are saying, I don't know how it's going to go. I'm nervous. Please don't record. So we always give the option. I'd say 80% of the time we record. And I think that's an opportunity for us that we have not yet really capitalized on, is what do we do then with all this great recorded content? We have it. We send it out, of course, to everybody who attended, saying, here it is, you can watch it, you can share it. Like, yeah, not a ton of traffic happens as a result of that, though, to be perfectly honest. And in our heads, it's this really wonderful thing, but I don't know if it is yet. I think we haven't figured it out. But I think there's a gold mine there for us to figure out how to take that and create probably a nurture out of it. Probably make sure that we have in our database, which has grown and is a really healthy size now, how do we know who in our database wants that kind of recorded content, and make sure that we're giving it to them in a drip fashion so that when the time is right for them, it's right there in front of them. We do share the links with our sales team. It's not uncommon for our sales team to ask us, where's that one thing on that one topic? I have a customer or an opportunity who's asking for it. So we do make sure that all of our content is in the CMS that our sales team has access to. We we do use it some in nurtures, but there's more opportunity there for us. And I think there's a question of what do we do with the content, and then there's also the question of how do we nurture the leads that come out of those events. And even that, we're getting better at that. I think that hasn't been where we've put the most effort in the last year. It's been figuring out the events and the volume or the top of funnel piece. But what we do know is we do know how which leads are the most valuable from those events. Who are the leads who show up and stay the longest and ask the questions and respond to polls and request demos. Those we know to give those directly to the sales team, and then we work with the SDRs to make sure that their email sequences are leading with need rather than leading with more content. And then we're working to create our own nurture programs to nurture the leads that registered but didn't show up, or showed up but immediately left, or maybe they showed up but they're not quite the right title and they didn't request a demo, those kinds of leads. I think we know what we need to do, but we haven't yet had the bandwidth to really focus there, and that's part of what we'll be doing the rest of this year.
Love it. And I was going to ask you, like, what are some of the challenges? What are the things that you're still needing to get on top of? And you're right. Sounds like a gold mine to me. Sounds like you figured out how to get people interested in what you have to say and to provide some quality content there. And now it's just a matter of, like, what do you do with that content, and what do you do with the folks that are coming out of those events? So that's a very exciting place to be, I think. And there's a question I wanted to ask you, because you said leading with need for your SDRs versus leading with content. Can you explain that a little bit? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, this is top of mind for me because we just recently started experimenting with this change, and in some ways I feel silly that it took us this long to make this change and experiment with this. But what it means for us is, we were handing leads over to the SDR team, and then they, together with us, were creating nurture sequences, mostly in email, but also with phone calls placed at the right positions. And we were starting with we were not being very aggressive. I hate using the word aggressive, but I'll use it because I think it maybe fits here. We weren't being aggressive in pushing our product or our demo or our solution. We knew that we have a ton of really wonderful content. So I mentioned that first asset that we produced. We probably now have 20 or 30 that are like that. So we have a rich database of content that we can offer. And so what we were doing until recently is following up with all these leads saying, glad you attended this thing. Hope you liked it. Here's a data point that was great. If you like that, you might also like this. And then giving another piece of content. What we started doing recently, and with a small experiment that did work, is being more direct with what the SDRs are following up with. And instead of leading with more content when we do the handover, is leading completely with, what is the need that you have that led you to attend this webinar or read this white paper? Guess what? Jem can solve this for you. I'd love to talk with you. Let's schedule a meeting. And really getting there quicker. And our early indication is that is working, and it is more quickly getting these responses and then these opportunities quicker, and also we think at a higher conversion rate.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing that and explaining what the difference is there. Let's talk about you a little bit more. We've talked about Jem. We've talked about all the cool stuff you're working on, things that you're trying to figure out. What about you? Like, what failures have you had that have really shaped how you lead, who you are at work as a person, all that stuff?
Yeah. You gave me a heads up that you were going to ask this question. And so I was thinking about this a bit over the last couple of days. And there is one failure early in my career that I want to tell you that story that I think is quite significant to who I am now as a marketer and how I lead. But before I tell that story, I want to also say that I don't think of a lot of what the kind of marketer I am today and how I do marketing. A lot of what has made me who I am, I wouldn't say is so much the failures as much as constant experimenting, and experiments come with tons of failures because you experiment, you figure out something that doesn't work. But I'm very fortunate in that early on in my career, I had mentors and managers who pushed me to experiment and made not just mistakes, but made test something. And if it doesn't work, then you don't do it again. Made that okay. And that is a big part of the kind of a marketer who I am. I want my entire marketing team to think about all the programs that they're running as, this is our best guess on what will work, but what tests can we build in so that we can be optimizing it as we go, which is hard and takes a lot of time, but that's the goal of what I'm trying to get to. So there's that. But then when I was trying to think about, what's an actual failure or something that felt like a big failure to me that has shaped who I am, there is one story that I can recall. It was from my very first job, and I was in a corporate office at a big national bank. My very first job out of school. I was not in the marketing department, but I wanted to be. I was doing employee recognition programs and events and things like that. And I made a mistake. That was very visible. I misspelled the word Ghirardelli. Very easy to do because at least at that time, it didn't automatically get fixed, right? So I made the mistake. I should have checked it before it went to print. I didn't. Printed out, I don't know, 100 of the thing that I was making with the word Ghirardelli on it. It was fixable, but it was highly visible. I was embarrassed. I didn't love it. I thought it was fine because I fixed it. Then about a week later, I had a meeting with the VP of marketing at this bank. And the purpose of this meeting was to talk with her about how I could make my way towards her department, or how I could be learning the skills that would help me be a marketer elsewhere. And she took the wind completely out of my sails, completely. She told me, you won't succeed as a marketer because you are not detail oriented enough to catch things like a misspelling like the word Ghirardelli. I don't think that's going to be the right career track for you. I was crushed. I could not believe that this mistake that I made, that I knew it was visible. I was already embarrassed. And I couldn't believe that I was hearing that I was the wrong kind of person to be a marketer. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that over the last now too many years, 18 years probably since this happened. And I've thought about this way more than she probably ever expected that I would. And I realized that it has made me a very different marketer and leader, because I spent a lot of time self-analyzing, can you be a marketer and not be detail oriented? And the answer is yes and no. You have to be detail oriented to be a marketer. You also have to be okay with making mistakes. You have to try and experiment and forgive yourself quickly if you make mistakes. You also, if you're not terribly detail oriented, which I will say I am detail oriented, to be honest, but I go fast. And when you go fast, you are prone to make mistakes like that. And so to put checks and balances in place to make sure that mistakes that I do make aren't huge, there's checks and balances in place to protect against something going out to 100,000 people. 100 people, okay, it's a small mistake. It's probably worth getting it out there quick. But it has shaped the way I think about mistakes, and how on my team I try to celebrate mistakes, or maybe not celebrate them because nobody wants to make mistakes. I try to make mistakes okay. And I haven't done this yet, but I keep intending to make a Slack channel for our organization called, don't make my mistake, where all of us can just type in there, "Ooh, I did this, be careful in case you didn't know, if you do this, this is going to happen." And this failure that I had early on in my very first year really made me self-analyze, is this actually a really bad thing that I need to try to self-correct? And the answer was no. It's my strength is my weakness. I need to put things in place so that nothing bigger than a misspelled Ghirardelli word happens. But it's also my superpower that I can go fast, that I can experiment quickly. And even more important than that is that I learned to be far more supportive than this person was. I make it a point to support anybody who wants to get into marketing, who wants to learn more, and to never ever make them feel like they're the wrong personality or they have the wrong traits, because every single person who has an interest in marketing or startups has a place, and they should be encouraged and held up, and to never, never, never put somebody down in that way that can really, really harm them, I think, in some ways. And I'm grateful I had the support system that it wasn't that big of a deal in the long run, but it did shape who I was, I think.
Isn't that fascinating how one person 18 years ago said that one thing, and it has left an imprint for, and has stayed with you for so long. It just goes to show that, like, people need to watch what they say when you're leading others, when you're in a position of leadership. You really have to pick your words carefully, right? Because those folks that are looking up to you are going to remember the word choice.
Yeah.
8, 15 years down the line.
Always be kind, right?
Be kind. Yeah. I cannot. Thanks for sharing that story. I mean, I can't imagine, right? Like being fresh, new, wanting to get into marketing, and then somebody just like makes a blatant statement, not even knowing where you're off to, where you're going to be in 5, 10, 15 years. But I appreciate that. And really, like you said, I think that you made a good point. Like, as a marketer, you need to be detail oriented? Yes and no, right? You do when it makes sense, but sometimes if you get bogged down in the details, you're going to be stuck. You're going to get stuck. You're going to get slow, and you won't actually do something. And that's limiting and not good when you're working at a startup.
Yeah.
So appreciate you talking about that. So I would personally love to know, like, how do you stay creative? How do you keep your marketing fresh? How do you keep from, sometimes when we keep doing something, you can get passive with your marketing, with your content. So how do you avoid that from happening?
Well, first of all, at a startup, I think it always pushes you for that to just not happen. It can't, right? You have to keep innovating and growing and scaling. And if you're just doing the same thing all the time, it won't happen. And so you won't be successful, and your startup won't succeed, or you won't succeed. So part of it is I stay creative by working in startups, because I'm always learning new industries or new ideal customer profiles or new segments, and figuring out experimenting what's going to work with them. But it is hard to stay creative. Marketing is so much a left brain, right brain thing, because we've got all this data, and then we are known as this creative bunch, and it's really hard to mix those. And I haven't worked in other departments outside of marketing, so I don't know if other departments have that same left brain, right brain thing that we have. And I don't know if also the strategic and the tactical have to be done at the same time in the same way that it does for marketing. But mixing all those things together is really hard. And so I think one way that I stay creative is acknowledging that really creative, crazy idea thing isn't my superpower. So I hire people onto my team who are more creative than me to have those ideas, to push, and to try to find those things. It is a hard thing.
It is hard, but I love how you mentioned that you don't have to be the beginner of it, right? Like, you hire really good people, talented people, you put your heads together. Maybe there's like there's like an idea person. I know I have friends who are like, oh yeah, that's the idea person.
Yes.
And then I wouldn't ask that person to actually do it. I'd ask that person to actually do it, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. Wonderful. Well, we covered a lot of ground here, and I absolutely loved our conversation. It's so interesting to me I have had a bunch of folks on, but I've never really dug deep into events. So I'm so glad that we got to cover that topic. And clearly you guys are exploring that and digging deeper and getting better with that form of marketing with your target audience. So thank you so much, Sara, for coming on the show. And if anybody wants to reach Sara, you can find her on LinkedIn, Kinsey Sara, not Sara Kinsey, Kinsey Sara. And to find out more about GEM, you can go to gem.com. Thank you, Sara.
Thank you. Have a great day.